Welcome to OurSport. I'm your host, Larry Ola. My son John is doing the recording and editing. Week 3 of the 2019 season is in the books, and OurSport has gone to our first road trip of the year to Starkville, Mississippi. Thank you, Malcolm. He was there with us. It was his first college football game. So I will say this, if you have a bucket list of college stadiums you want to go to, Mississippi State should be on it. The cowbell thing is real. Bring earplugs. You're going to need it. Now, about this game in particular, I'm not sure if the announcers mentioned it on TV, but I think weather was a factor in this game. This game was in the upper 90s. The week before, some of the fans had heat stroke issues. At the stadium, they're distributing water for free, and this was clearly a factor. It was even hotter on the field. If you watch this game, the skill position players, the receivers on both sides were dropping the ball. I think it was due to humidity. I think the ball was slick from sweat, and it affected play somewhat there. Mississippi State quarterback Tommy Stevens started the game. He didn't finish the game. They had options, Mississippi State did, but they went with a freshman in Garrett Schrader, erratic throwing the ball. Even inaccuracy might have been also a part of the weather because the ball coming out of his hands the wrong way. He was not accurate. Schrader's a big athletic kid though. He had a spectacular effort to try to salvage the game on their last possession, a 15-yard run on a 4th and 16, maybe the highlight of the week, and an airborne kind of tackle from 2 Kansas State players, and it was not enough to win. So Kansas State pulls the upset. The thing that stood out when you watch this game was how much better Kansas State was on the line of scrimmage. I didn't expect this. Mississippi State, a middle-tier team in the line of scrimmage league, I expected them to control the line of scrimmage, and that wasn't the case when you watch this. Kansas State looked more comfortable on offense. They were choppy, they had mistakes, but they didn't seem like they had to fight for what they had as much as Mississippi State did. So they're 3-0 right now, Kansas State, and they're in a great position. Kansas State fans at first, they were not excited about getting Chris Klieman. They thought that they could do better. Klieman was a great coach, 4 national championships, North Dakota State. That is a lower level, but it's the same level that produced Brian Kelly, produced Jim Tressel. There are some good coaches at that level. And he had the unenviable task of replacing Bill Snyder at Kansas State. Now, let's put things in perspective for the Kansas State fans who are upset about this. When Bill Snyder took over, maybe it was too long ago for them to remember, Kansas State was the worst team in college football, in the history of college football. I don't like to use a lot of terms like the entire history of, the greatest running back in the history of college football, greatest team, because I think when you hear that, people don't really put a lot of research into it, and they just kind of have things that are in their memory, but in their recent memory to go by. But Kansas State literally was the worst team in their history of college football by winning percentage when Snyder took over. So Snyder gets there, and they're basically winning 1 game a year. I believe they're on even worse than that, a 33-game losing streak or something along those lines. And he gets them to winning about 1 or 2 games a year, 3 or 4, 4 or 5, 5 or 6. Slow, incremental building. He does things differently than some of his other contemporaries. He doesn't schedule powerful teams out of conference to fulfill his athletic budget. He doesn't go on the road and play USC for $1.2 million to lose 55-7, to get killed, to put that money in the athletic coffers. He schedules light non-conference opponents, and it built their record up this way. It built them up incrementally. At least this way, they could say that we're not a 1-win team anymore. We're a 4-win team. We're a 6-win team. And after a while, Snyder has them contending for a national championship. He took the worst team in the history of college football and had them contending for a national championship. In 1998, they're playing in a Big 12 championship game. Kansas State's quarterback, Michael Bishop, is running with the ball. They have the lead. All they have to do is run the clock out, and he fumbles the ball, and they get upset by Texas A&M. This is their high water mark. Had he held on to that ball, they would have played Tennessee for the national championship and I believe that they would have won. They certainly at least would have had a chance to win. The man took the worst team in the history of college football to possibly winning a national championship. So on that level, you can understand why the fans got so much spoiled with him. But you're still Kansas State. You're still the team that, without Bill Snyder, had absolutely no tradition. You're still a team without the resources of Texas or Oklahoma, without the prestige. Still a team that's 2 hours from a major airport. So getting a coach like Chris Kleiman, it's not Urban Meyer, but I don't think they appreciate how good Kleiman was at his last stop. He's off to a great start here, an upset win, 3-0, almost certainly going to make a bowl his first game, and he could have a long, successful career here. This was a great hire. I think the fit was good. Now, let's talk about Georgia Tech. We live in the Atlanta area. We have a lot of coverage locally about the Georgia Bulldogs. I listen to the radio quite a bit. I read the local newspaper quite a bit. If you didn't live here, you might not be surprised that this team is not covered much. This team was not covered at all under Paul Johnson. On the radio, 95% of the talk would be about the Georgia Bulldogs. They're the flagship program of the state. That's understandable. Georgia Tech was not even on the radar. Nobody was discussing this team. Paul Johnson did not focus on recruiting, made no news there. Classes in the 40s, 50s, 60s. Ran a high school offense for the most part. Was a complete dud in the press conference and had no interest in promoting his team. Had no interest in recruiting. Did not want to talk to reporters. I know this from living in this area. Meanwhile, you have the team down the street in Athens. Now is a perennial top 5 team, much better than they've been in years. And I think that Georgia Tech made a great hire in Geoff Collins in terms of what they wanted from their program. They made the exact opposite hire in terms of personality and style than Paul Johnson. Collins came in right away talking about running NFL schemes in all 3 phases. He is a massive promoter of his program. Collins has a lot of recruiting, I would call them gimmicks. Waffle House University. The players' hashtags are prominent. He wants to get players into Georgia Tech, and this is definitely the right approach. If you look now, Georgia is one of the most talent-rich teams, talent-rich states in the entire country. Georgia is a top 5 state, maybe higher in the country in amount of NFL players it produces. And Atlanta, for the most part, until Kirby Smart got there, Atlanta was always contested territory. Atlanta was always fought over by a number of teams. Georgia has started to tighten their grip on that under Kirby Smart. But even under Mark Richt, they didn't own Atlanta. A lot of teams raided Atlanta, and Georgia Tech is downtown, right in the center of the city. Now, realistically, they're not going to get most of the players away from Georgia in a recruiting battle. But now they have a chance for some, and they have a chance to steal some from Clemson if they could just get more than they've had, and they are capable, much more capable of getting more than they've had before. I compare them a lot to Stanford because Stanford had a similar profile. Stanford was an academic school in a major metropolitan area, albeit the local competition for recruiting was not as strong. But you look at what Jim Harbaugh turned Stanford into, nearly a conference championship level team, and Georgia Tech's profile is very similar to Stanford because of this. The recruiting area it's located in, the way they actually use academics as a strength now. Academics can be a weakness at a place like Georgia Tech unless you know how to sell it, unless you tell kids that, you can come over here and you can graduate with a good degree, even if you have a knee injury that ends your career in football. You never know how your football career is going to end. And this was absolutely the right hire for this program, I think. Now, they lost to the Citadel as 27-point favorites. Georgia Tech fans that I knew were saying they were going to have a bowl year. I think that was pretty optimistic. They weren't going to be in a bowl this year. They opened with Clemson and closed with Georgia in a rebuilding year. You're not going to go to a bowl when you're Georgia Tech. You open with Clemson, you close with Georgia. They're changing schemes drastically on both sides of the ball. Losing the Citadel, this was bad. This is a game they should have won. They are very much in year zero. You can see them being better at the end of the year. Now, I will say this. All the things that they're doing for recruiting, they're going over the top to promote their program. They're marketing to young kids. Older people don't like it. Older people don't matter because they're not the ones going to the school. But when you have the turnover grease board and you put the player's hashtag on there whenever he gets a turnover, everybody has a turnover gimmick nowadays. When you go over the top with all these recruiting gimmicks and you're well known for it, you have to win. Because if you keep doing this and you don't win, then you look silly. Then it turns into a clown show. And then you have people mocking you. You're in year 2 or 3 and you're still building and you're using these gimmicks. Then you become the Tennessee turnover trash can. So I think year 0 for him is this year, and you have to give him leeway. You have to give him time to build his program. But he needs to show progress in year 2. Almost any kind of loss is forgivable this year. That Citadel loss was bad. But they have to be better next year, visibly, markedly better than they were this year. Meanwhile, in West Lafayette, the Purdue Boilermakers played a home game against TCU and got killed. Purdue's head coach, Jeff Brom, highly regarded, offensive mastermind. And I would say that's probably true. He's did great work in Western Kentucky, came over here, and the results so far have been disappointing, honestly. The first 2 years, Purdue's had middling records. They did have a massive upset of Ohio State last year. Got a lot of mileage off that win. But now they've started 1-2, off to a disappointing start to this year. They had a quarterback injury. Elijah Sindelar didn't play. That's a factor. But this offense still had 200 yards. This is an offensive mastermind. 200 or so total yards, 23 rushing. They were not competitive in this game. This is a game that the score wasn't particularly close, but it was probably even worse than the score indicated. So they have some searching to do because this is not what they expected when they hired Brom. They expected somewhat more results. On the other side of the field, you have the most underrated coach in college football, I think, in Gary Patterson. You look at the resources that Patterson has at TCU, they're better now. He's been there 19 years. They've invested money in the program. But he's never had the resources that some of his contemporaries have had. And he's had some great years and some huge wins, an undefeated season. I think of Patterson as a coach under the radar that when people mention a top 5 coaches in America, they never mention him, and I have no idea why. I remember Kellen Moore, Boise State, the winningest quarterback in the history of college football by record, 50-3. He was 50-3. 2 losses came against Patterson. He's 49-1 against teams not named TCU, coached by Gary Patterson. Bob Stoops, in the middle of his tenure at Oklahoma, had a long home winning streak, impossible to beat at home. TCU went in there in a Patterson first game of the season, beat them, no problem. They weren't even in the Big 12 by then. They were still an out-of-conference team with less resources to recruit talent, and he still beat a powerhouse Oklahoma team. A team that had Adrian Peterson on their roster, by the way. So, Patterson now, I think, is 3-0. His teams this year, they have had years that were marred by injuries before. Last year, some other ones. And there are times where his record will be down. They never have bad years back-to-back. And a lot of times when they have a bad year, they're not hurt by injuries. They're devastated by injuries. A long list of players that are out for a year. I believe they had almost 20 last year. Now they're 3-0. They look fully healthy for the most part. They have had a few injuries already, but nothing significant. And this team is dangerous. They're in our top 10, if you notice, this year, as of this filming. And no record would surprise me for this team. No record would surprise me in terms of their conference. It would not surprise me one bit if they beat even the upper tier teams. Texas, Oklahoma would not be shocked one bit. Because this is a coach that's supposed to lose these games. Frequently supposed to lose these games. And frequently wins these games. People have a hard time taking them seriously because they don't have prestige. They don't have a quarterback like Jalen Hurts or a running back like Jonathan Taylor. but this team is supremely well coached on both sides of the ball. They proved it. They proved who the better coach was against Purdue, and they are a major threat in this conference, and I think a sleeper playoff team. Michigan State at home against Arizona State. You know, back in the day, they used to have these losses. Sparty know they would find a way to lose games in strange fashion. They were known for this. Arizona State comes in there, a hotly contested defensive battle. I expected a little more from the Michigan State offense this year. They had a lot of injuries last year. I thought they could acquit themselves better. They were hit and miss at best. The defense, I've said before, I think is the best defense in the country. They played great. They played great all year. I expect this to continue. And this is very much of a Mark D'Antonio game. He has these kind of games where he'll win a game 13-10 or apparently lose a game 10-7. But the series at the end where Michigan State is going for a field goal to tie the game and misses it because they have 12 men on the field. This is a strange segment. We were driving back from a road trip and we were following this game on the internet, and when we saw it got replayed because of a penalty, we thought it's because of a false start. And it would never occur to me you'd have 12 men on the field for field goal protection. This is a strange way to lose, and this is reminiscent of a John L. Smith way to lose this game. This is reminiscent of some of these strange ways that Michigan State was known for losing games in the past. I will say this about this team. They're not dead. They're could upset almost anybody. I think about a few years ago when they were basically a 3-9 team under D'Antonio, a down year. They played Michigan pretty well, as they always do, and they were 1 point away from upsetting Ohio State. They're not going to be out of any game with him. On the other side, Herm Edwards at Arizona State brings a freshman quarterback against this defense and wins the game. Arizona State right now is not a threat for the playoff. I don't think they're a threat for the conference, but they're off to a great start. And I was at the front of the list of people mocking Arizona State for his decision. I will clearly admit I was wrong. Herm Edwards is doing great work there, and he's a fun guy. He's easy to root for. So they're on their way to making some noise in the Pac-12. So if you look at the OurSport Top 10 presented here, here's our thoughts. I think that the top 6 teams are clearly better than everybody behind them. I think they're clustered in the same area. Teams at the top are always going to be a notch better than teams below them, of course, but I think what's going on is that these teams are maybe two full notches above the teams ahead of them, that there's clear separation, and all 6 of these teams are clustered closely together. They're just collecting talent at a really high rate. So I think that this is the group that's going to produce the 4 playoff teams out of these top 6, barring a massive upset. When it comes to Georgia, first of all, their treatment of Arkansas State head coach Blake Anderson. Blake Anderson's wife was battling breast cancer for 2 years. The poor man was trying to coach football while his wife was dying of cancer, doing his best, did great work. And the Georgia fans rallied around him and wore pink at the stadium to honor the memory of his wife. That is a classy act. You have to give them credit for that. They have a huge game next week against Notre Dame. I think they're going to win that game comfortably. That's been one of the most the games people have been looking forward to most of the year. Now, when it comes to Georgia, I will say this. We went to the Mississippi State game. They were some of the cheapest tickets I ever found. They were a bargain. And we'll go see anybody play, but if it's a bargain and we haven't been there before, we like that even more. Georgia, when they played Vanderbilt on the road in their opener, was one of the most expensive tickets that week. I believe that week it was the most expensive ticket for a game. This Notre Dame game is considered the most expensive game of the year so far. Last year's Notre Dame game cost more than some of the playoff matchups. There's parking, tailgate parking at Sanford Stadium. I was talking to a Georgia fan. He thought about going. He looked it up. It's $400 for parking. $400 for tailgate parking. He went the next day, the parking was already sold out. This is a fan base that supports their team. This is a fan base that's dying for a winner. And I wonder how much college football would change if Georgia got back to being a national title winning team. Clemson is so much different as a program than they were before Dabo Swinney 5 or 6 years ago. You don't even regard them in the same way. They were a joke. They were people were talking about Clemsoning, and Georgia is so close with the talent they have to being on its doorstep. They have an Alabama problem. Everybody else does. So on behalf of John and I and Malcolm this week, thanks for joining us for OurSport. We'll be back next week. We want to be user-friendly. We're here to take suggestions. We'll talk about your team if you want. Somebody told me to put WD-40 in the chair, and I listened. You can find us on Twitter on OurSport3. You can find us at email, OurSport150@gmail.com. Last week I said OurSport. It's OurSport150. And we've got a Facebook page, OurSport College Football, our group page. Come join us. If you have any suggestions, if you want us to talk about your team, let us know. We're user-friendly. We're here to be of service to our fans. Anything you'd like a suggestion, just fill us in. Thanks. We'll see you next week.